Hi everyone, it's me, JB, your co-host of Gutter Boys. I'm with my co-host, Cam Del Rosario. Cam, how are you doing today?
What's up? I'm good.
Hope you guys are enjoying that interview that we did with Katrina so far. The second half is going to be at the back end of this episode. Before we do that though, I figured now would be a good time to kind of talk a little bit about comic shops, specifically our past experiences with them and our current experiences with them, if at all, I guess. Anyway, Cam, you want to take it away from me right now so that I can stop talking into this microphone?
Well, how often do you go to the comic shop? Like, I go every week still, every Wednesday.
Yeah, well, you do pickups. You do the weekly Wednesday pickups, right?
Yeah, it's like I just go on my lunch break at work. It's just an experience that I've, kind of done off and on throughout my whole life. At this point now, I guess more than not, I usually just kind of go in and look at the wall, and if something looks cool, I'll get it. And then I'll look at back issue bins and, the graphic novels that got sold to them because the used stuff's where it's at usually. But yeah, no, I just like the experience. So I go every week. When you go, since you're rarely going now, are you going and looking for something, or are you just kind of wandering in? Is it random? Is it like premeditated when you go?
Not really. If I'm ever going to a comic shop nowadays, it's either because I have a friend that's doing some kind of event, like debuting a book or whatever, or doing a signing, or if it's people that are coming from out of town and they want to hit up those shops. But outside of that, no, I try to... well, it's not that I try. It's mostly that I just... I'm broke. I'm broke, and I also end up spending way more than I probably should, especially when I go to Quimby's, which I know you're kind of familiar with at this point. But no, I'm what you would call a bad comic reader, in that I don't actively go to shops, I don't actively do the weekly pickups, I don't actively purchase new books or any of that. We've mentioned this before. I mostly just read stuff that my friends are releasing.
Right.
I can get that stuff in person at an event, or if we're hanging out. So, I don't know.
Was there ever a period where you actually went on a regular basis, like when you were younger or anything like that?
Not really. Well, I would say the only point where I was actively doing pickups was at some point in 2010 for maybe 4 months. And that was only because legitimatately the only reason I was doing that is because I had nothing better to do with my time. I was just depressed and bored and had nothing to do. I ended up moving back into Lakeland, and I was living with my parents again for a short time. So, naturally, if you live with your parents and you're in your 20s, you clearly go and buy comics on a weekly basis because you've just given up on life.
You gotta escape, man.
Yeah. So I was reading, what was coming out then?
Was that New 52? Was that kind of kicking?
No, I wasn't into that.
Okay.
No. I think the things that stood out were so the X-Force run with, I forget the team that was even working on it. It was the one about the Apocalypse clone or whatever, and he was just a kid. And the X-Force team, it was Wolverine, Deadpool, Jesus Christ. It was Wolverine, Deadpool. What's that guy's name from the new X-Men run by Grant Morrison? The French guy.
Oh, shit. What is that guy's name?
He's kind of popular now.
Yeah.
Archangel. A couple others. I mean, it wasn't an exceptional book. I thought the art was good, and I thought the story was very straightforward and had a very quick pace to it. I think the Marvel Max Deadpool series was running at that time too, and I was picking that up. That one was
David Lapham.
Maybe.
I think David Lapham was writing that, because I remember getting that just because I'm a huge fan of that guy from Stray Bullets. Were you going to the shop that Katrina works in? Because you said you were in Lakeland.
Yeah.
Oh God.
Yeah, I was. Yeah, that was back when our buddy Ed E.T. was the manager. Now he's regional manager, I believe.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I was going in and picking up those. There was something else. Oh, that was when Batman Inc. was coming out, too.
Dude,
like,
yeah.
The first bulk of, like, when Quietly was still on the book for about, what, like 4 or 5 issues?
Right.
And then, what's his name? Who picked it up after? He basically...
It was Cameron Stewart, right?
No, it was a different artist that got picked up because he was basically a Quietly clone. I want to say it was like Nick something or other.
That whole like run that Morrison had was amazing. I still have that like in trades and floppies because I got the whole run between those types of books because it was just incredible. Even that Frank Quitely run on Batman and Robin when Bruce was dead. That's what awesome.
It was. That's what it was. It was Batman and Robin, not Batman Inc. I didn't catch all of Batman Inc. because that was the tail end of that. But yeah, the Batman Through Time thing where he dies or something.
And he the 6th Batman, and he runs through time, and there's like Caveman Batman and 20s Noir Batman. That shit was wild.
Yeah, it was fun, I guess.
Yeah,
I don't know. I didn't really. It wasn't exactly anything I was too super into. The only thing that stands out in my mind is really those Quietly issues.
Oh yeah, for sure. He did the covers like for the first like year and a half of that book though. So even though he wasn't doing the interiors, he was doing some great covers. There was that one where that villain Flamingo and he like ripped Prince's Purple Rain like with the bike.
Oh yeah.
That shit was so awesome.
That was really good. There was also a Spider-Man story about like a little baby. And, like, all the villains were trying to get the baby. And Spider-Man had to save the baby because he's a good guy. Oh. He's doing superhero things, real. In New York City. New York City. Yeah. He's a real hero in New York. He's a real New Yorker from Queens. And, yeah, I don't know. It was fine. There was nothing really that just stood out. It was all pretty, like, relatively... I don't want to say mediocre, but just like baseline.
It was just
like,
fine.
It was fine. Like, right. Yeah. Nothing absolutely terrible, but also nothing completely like mind-numbingly memorable.
Yeah, I feel like that's just like how DC and Marvel are now. It's just pretty fine, like these characters, so you're going to relate to them
actually
on a surface level, but yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say there was one thing that stuck out, and I think that was when... That was during the Marvel... What is that? Secret? No, not Secret Wars. What was that? Dark Reign. It was a Dark Reign storyline that was happening. And I didn't give a shit about Dark Reign. Except, well, I'll take that back. I thought the writing for Green Goblin was pretty cool because they actually made him a pretty unique villain. But... what really stood out is when they killed Punisher, and then that led into the Tony Moore run with Frankencastle. And that to this day is like my favorite kind of like mainstream Marvel title that they've done in the last, 15 years probably.
Did you talk about Frankencastle?
Yeah.
Yeah. Dude, do you know Connor Williamson? Not know him personally, but have you seen his work? He did that Antigone book for Koyama.
No. I'm pretty sure the only Koyama book I've ever owned is Ben Sears books.
Okay.
And I actually haven't even read those yet. They've just been sitting in a stack. Bunch of other books that I have not read yet, so I will get to them.
Antigone was like one of my favorite books from, I don't know if it was 2017. I think it was 2017, but it's an incredible book. But his art style is like, super like, unique, but he ended up doing a Marvel Punisher story that was gnarly as fuck and like one of those little Punisher one-shots. But just somebody from indie comics, I guess, getting into a Punisher story. So that was kind of crazy. But so when you're going to a shop though, what do you like to see? Are you a person that likes the back issue bin? Are you looking through new stuff? What do you like to see in a store?
Yeah, I want to say that I'm more of a back issue guy if I am going to be going and actively digging through stuff. I especially want to look at like sort of I don't know what to call it, like because it's not garbage. It's just like stuff that people don't actively look out for. But I like a lot of the 80s into the early 90s, like weirdo superhero books or just stuff that just, had a super short run.
Like Eclipso.
Kind of, yeah. Running on that line of just like so bizarre and out there. Like a lot of that stuff that came out after the Ninja Turtle boom with the black and white comics. Like so much of that stuff is really, really wild, and I love running into stuff that I have never seen or heard before in a long box, and just like, you know, finding stuff that is just really out there. And of course, you're never going to see it outside of those situations. Or if it's somebody like, you know, Jim Rugg that's like actively plugging those books, because he's like one of those guys that also digs through those types of boxes. Right. So yeah, that stuff's really cool. I personally, for me, a comic shop needs to have like the shop has to be presentable in the same way as like any retail store has to be presentable. Mm-hmm. Right. And it also has to be as welcoming as any retail store. You know, I feel like, because when I was a kid, there was a shop called Fantasy Factory. And, you know, they had...
Did Rob Dyrdek own it?
I have no idea who that is.
The skater. He had an MTV show called Fantasy Factory.
Oh, no. These people were not cool. I can tell you that much. No. It was like always poorly lit. Like it was like weirdly dark. It was always dusty and dank, and like it was like the employees never did anything. It was only just like these two dumpy old dudes. Well, they weren't even that old. They were probably at the time in their 30s, but they were just like schlubby guys that just didn't do anything. They would just sit there and like talk about some fucking thing about Warhammer or some shit. I don't know. And, but they, you know, they weren't actively trying to sell anything or get new customers or any of that shit. It was very much the stereotypical comic shop, right? Like the thing that I think is part responsible for the downturn in the market. Like people realize that you can't really just depend on these titles to sell themselves. You also have to like try and actively sell, you know, you have to be a salesperson, but you also have to like be a welcoming space to new customers. Because if you're only just selling to the same 30 people, eventually those people are going to either move or age out. And then what? What are you going to do after that? And you're kind of screwed. And that's what happened with Fantasy Factory. That place closed up like probably 15 years later after that.
As their customer base died, the business did, you know, just because like everybody got old, moved on, and then they didn't welcome a new market. So you kind of just get swallowed up. Yeah,
basically. So I like, and I think you're seeing this more now with more comic shops, is that they are trying to develop a better relationship with their a better relationship with their customers, being kind of more welcoming and receptive to that kind of thing. And just like running it like a store. Like, I don't know, like this isn't your room in your mom's basement, you know, like this is like a business.
Right. Well, I think doesn't Diamond like secret shop places now?
Oh, I don't know. Do they? I haven't heard of that.
Yeah, like I'm pretty sure that like Diamond like will send representatives to like shops now, like kind of like any other retail. Like have you worked in retail? Do you know what a secret shopper is?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so like they'll like ask for like, let's say Batman number 33 comes out next week. They'll go in on a fucking Tuesday and be like, hey, do you have, you know, Batman 32? And if you sell it to them, because like technically retailers get their books on Monday or Tuesdays, you know, they're just not able to be sold till Wednesday. But if you sell it to them, like Diamond's like, fuck you, we know you did that. And it's like, yeah, they have a secret shopper program, I'm pretty sure, from what I've read.
Yeah, but that to me sounds like they're just trying to stop people from selling the book before it has the market date.
But also I think like there's like other parts of the report card where, you know, it's like cleanliness of the store. Did you get greeted like a traditional secret shopper thing? So maybe it's forcing comic stores to be more on their toes because Diamond's the only game in town.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Maybe.
That's speculation, you know. But yeah, I mean, I don't know, man, like, because, you know, comic stores are, like, my favorite thing to visit. Every time I'm in another town, I just pull up Google and I look up the closest comic store. And usually you can find, like, a few. You know, every big city has, like, a handful. And it's crazy because, like, no comic store is really like another. Even, like, you know, just from the layout of it. Like, they all have books, of course. But, like, I've never really been in a comic store where I've went into another one and been like, oh, this looks just like that shop. Like, I feel like they're their own unique spaces in their own way. I don't know. It's kind of this bizarre thing where it's like they can be small, but I don't know. Each one's just a little different. I guess Katrina said she worked for a chain. Is there any kind of like setup or like floor plan that they have to where all those stores look the same?
No, not really. I mean, there's a general kind of it's probably similar to the way like Books A Million runs, well, used to run at least their comic section. So it's like kind of standardized, but I don't know, because I've only been to 2 locations, the one in my hometown and the one just outside of Tampa. So they definitely held different cultures. I'll say that much.
Okay, gotcha.
But to me, they kind of all, outside of the one in my hometown, I feel like comic shops in general just kind of feel the same. You know, like the layout never really diverges that much. Because, I mean, at a certain point, like, you kind of have to follow those layout rules and those organizational rules because that's how you find stuff easier. I mean, if you diverge too much from that, then you just make it so that people can't find the stuff they're trying to buy.
Right. I think what I was, I guess, trying to get across was more so like the space that they're in. I've never been in a comic store that's in like a similar space to another. Granted, you know, I've probably been to like 50, you know, but like I feel like they're always like in these just like spaces. But you're right, it's always like lining the walls, you know, and there's a middle section where there's like a pit of comics.
I mean, spaces, I would say that they pretty much all usually are across the board pretty similar. The only one, honestly, the only shot that ever stood out to me is Quimby's. Just because the interior does not look like your standard comic shop. Yeah, so I mean, like you're in your experience, you're seeing a lot of like spaces that are the same type of layout, or not the same type of layout, but the same type of like spaces interior, that they occupy. Yeah, like in terms of like interior design and whatnot, they all look pretty similar. They all have like white walls. They all have the same white racks, or like the what is the like. The rack layout stuff for the walls. Yeah, like the little the wall shelves or whatever. Yeah, it's like pretty generic. Nothing's ever nothing ever is meant to like stand out too much. In terms of like, you know, the interior design, I feel like, again, Quimby's is really the only one that ever stood out to me that kind of is different because, and I think that has more to do with the fact that that location is at a very specific building, and also they carry very different products, so that maybe that's it. I don't really know. Because a lot of, I mean, it's like coffee shops. Think about coffee shops and how many of them just all look the fucking same. Yeah, they did, like, interior wise. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I guess in Kentucky, if you come visit, I'm gonna take you because none of them look the same. Interesting. You know, I've been to shops in Nashville and California. Like, you know, in California, I've been to like Golden Apple and Secret Headquarters. You know, they weren't the same. What was the one that just closed? Like Atomic something? I don't know. But yeah, and then like, so I've never had that experience. And then in Chicago, like I've only been to Quimby's and Chicago Comics, and Chicago Comics is kind of like a fucking Walmart comic store. It's just so huge in there. But yeah, like my experience, like it's always in like this crazy unique space, which I guess kind of makes sense. But I mean, I would say that maybe so for example, the comic shop that's in my hometown that Katrina works at, their last 2 locations were fairly small compared to like maybe like I don't know, like Arcane Comics in Seattle. But yeah, I don't know. Outside of like size, you know, like square footage, beyond that, I don't know. They all just kind of melt into the same kind of generic feel, you know, which is not a bad thing. It's actually kind of good that they're all kind of uniform in that way. But I mean, for like everyday, you know, non-comic fans, you know. Right. You know, Heroes in Charlotte to me stands out, but they changed. Is Heroes a shop in Charlotte? Yeah, too? It is. So the comic convention is called Heroes because the shop is called Heroes. And so their prior location, they just moved. I haven't been to the new one. I'll be at that one this year. Which did you decide you're doing Heroes? Yeah. I ended up getting I got an invite from the organizers, one of the main organizers, and so it worked out. Nice. Patrick will be there. Patrick Ian Rooks. I know he'll be there because that's like in his hood. Oh, okay. I'll have to hit him up then and see if he wants to hang out. For sure. That's exciting, man. I've kind of said it on the show. Like, I just don't have the balls to do that show just because I don't think I would sell well. I mean, you know, I'm only really doing it because I'm getting the comp table and I'm not paying for a room because my brother goes to that show every year, really. Because, you know, like, I don't know how familiar you are with Heroes as a convention, but they primarily focus on artists and writers, and granted, it's still heavily leaning on Marvel, DC, maybe Image, Dark Horse, etc., but it's still primarily artist and like creator driven.
Yeah, it seems like it's like exactly. That's kind of the vibe I've gotten, because it's like the people that go are like badass like indie comic creators, but also it's got like you'll have like fucking Chris Claremont there, that's just got some really heavy hitters, and so it's a really cool looking show.
Yeah, it's like if TCAF did if the people that tabled and go to TCAF were focused on superhero books more so, or that kind of genre of books, then that's kind of the same vibe. They have a lot of Silver Age era creators, artists, inkers, pencilers, that kind of thing. Back when the labor laterally was very kind of regimented and separate. So my brother loves commissioning, those guys, or buying original pages from those guys.
That's incredible.
Yeah. So he offered to, because he got a room and it comes with 2 beds and he's only going to need one of them. So he's just like, yeah, if you want to crash with me. So
your brother's a big comic fan?
He is. I mean, he's a great bit older than me. So he mainly focuses on Silver Age. And some Golden Age stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, I know he still reads kind of a little bit contemporary stuff, but most of it he doesn't really care for, from what I can tell. He's definitely more of like an old school kind of, he likes what he likes. And he has a massive collection, like comically large, in terms of like single issues and also like original art. So. Right.
That's awesome, man. I bet. Does he live in Chicago as well, or Florida?
No, he lives in Virginia.
Oh, okay. So, are you all close enough in age to where you all live together, or was he out of the house when you were a kid?
Oh, no, like I said, he's a great deal older than me. Like,
okay, gotcha.
By 25 years.
Okay, yeah.
He was in college he was getting out of college by the time I was, born.
Interesting, yeah. So there was no hand me down. Like, I know your exposure to comics was mainly, you've talked about, working with Aaron, or hanging out with Aaron, but so he was never around to like show you things when you were younger.
Not in comics. I mean, I think I only really figured out that he was into comics when I was much older, like in middle school or high school. My initial experience with comics was like 7-Eleven, because my mom used to run like a hair salon, and right down the road from where the shop was a 7-Eleven. So every once in a while I would go over there and get a slushie and buy like a comic or two if I had the change. And in fact, my earliest memory was buying that first issue that kind of introduced the what was that shit? I think it introduced the Thanos storyline.
Oh, yeah. I think we talked about that before. Yeah. And I remember going to 7-Eleven and buying things. I remember one time I bought an X-Force. It had to have been Liefeld, just timing wise, from a 7-Eleven. I really wish that gas stations and, grocery stores still had comics, even if it was like just mainstream stuff. At least it would be available in that, avenue. I think the only mainstream store to like carry comics is like Barnes and Noble, because you can find some titles right there next to the magazines.
Right. And I will say that like if you're a parent, you're probably going to be more likely to buy them a comic than like a pack of gum or like candy bars, Oh
yeah, because you don't want your kid to get that shit everywhere.
Right. So you're just like, here's this, you'll actually like read. Yeah. So that's cool.
Yeah, and exactly. Like, I remember, like, my mom had no problem when we were kids, like, getting us a magazine or a comic. I feel like my brother and I always had, like, Disney Adventure, Nickelodeon magazine, or, like, Archie books.
Yeah.
So that was always, like, kind of something that was around. And then, we had a comic shop growing up that I would go to, because in Kentucky, we didn't have 7-Eleven. So I remember you would get your comics from Walden Books, off of like a little spinner, and then we had a place called Comic Vault that's like 10 minutes up the road in another town that was a pretty crazy shop. There was originally 2 owners, and then out back one of the owners killed the other because it was like a coke front. That's like the rumor and innuendo around the town. Dude went to jail for like 6 or 7 years, and now he's out. And I'll stop in there because like he has a lot of shit like in the warehouse, like, and he has it all like cataloged on his computer and like an Excel spreadsheet that's like ancient as fuck. But it is kind of weird being in that shop because, he's a murderer and everything. But
but the guy that died wasn't exactly popular, right?
Yeah. And I mean, he got, it was like self-defense or whatever. Right. But I mean, he still, but in his defense, you would not think this guy was a murderer just talking to him. You would just have to like have read the newspaper articles and everything like that. So maybe it was self-defense, Right. I don't know exactly what went down. But
he did his time.
He did his time, and he came out and he's still fucking slinging comics, man. So props to the Comic Vault in Radcliffe.
That's pretty legit.
So what's your favorite shop? Like, I don't know if it's in Chicago or if it's the one Katrina works at in Lakeland. What's your favorite shop?
In Florida, it would definitely be the one that Katrina works at. Like, bar none. And I'm going to say 90% of that is because of the people that work there. And you know what? I will say that is the main thing that makes shops stand out to me nowadays. Is that really the way you stand out is by the people that you employ. And as a result, the type of stuff that's being brought into the shop. So I'll always peek at like employee recommendations. They'll always have like some rack somewhere, and there'll be a new release and like yada yada. This employee, recommends these couple of books, and I always check those. That's like kind of the thing that I keep an eye out for the most.
Right.
And like, I don't know. It's like and we talk about it in the interview, but that shop, for where it is and how small it is, it's like wildly ahead of the curve. And people that go there, again, I really don't think they understand how spoiled they are in a lot of ways.
Right.
And then in Chicago, probably Challengers, just as like a general kind of like, if you want to get weekly issues, Challengers, I think, is up there. Because of the people that they employ, and the owners are really cool. And then Quimby's for just like everything else, Growing up, honestly, my favorite quote unquote shops, I was not outside of Books A Million, which I spent a lot of time in as a kid. I was mostly picking up back issues through flea markets. But like growing up, my dad, because he's been retired since like the dawn of time, and he worked at a flea market, selling stuff at his booth and whatnot. And every once in a while, he would pick up some comics from like a vendor or whatever there, and bring them home to me. And that's really where I got most of my experience with comic books. So I was like, I don't know, like 8 or 9 around there, and getting books 5 years old, after the fact, sometimes 10 years after the fact.
Oh yeah. A lot of people don't know what they have there too.
I remember my dad brought back a bunch of Spider-Man comics for me. They're just like kind of random. And a couple of them were part of the Maximum Carnage storyline.
Oh, sick. And it was like a 15-part story.
More than that, I would think.
Yeah, it was crazy. And it ran over like 4 books.
Yeah. So he got me that, and I think he also got me like the first issue of Venom.
Okay, the one with like the red holographic cover?
Yep, that's the one.
Yeah.
And then some random like... it was mostly Marvel. I mean, there was some like Batman stuff and a couple of Superman issues, but mostly it was Marvel stuff. No, not really much in X-Men either. So it was mostly Spider-Man. What is that character? Not Deadpool. Fucking what's his name? He's a cyborg, part of the Weapon X program. It's like Death something, and I can't fucking remember.
Deathlock?
Deathlock, thank you.
Yeah.
Deathlock. Yeah, so I got a couple of Deathlock issues, and I remember being super into those. I don't know. And then when I started helping out working with my dad in the flea market, I would then go to those same vendors that were, I would assume, is where he got those books from. And I would just like pick through and buy some random stuff.
So, I mean, and that's kind of like funny that you were able to like get your comics in such a weird way, and especially because you were getting them and they were years old, because honestly, like, that's kind of like awesome because you were getting to see probably stuff that was really good. Now, the reason why I say that is because like I feel like, because this is probably what you were reading stuff from the 80s at that point because you were a kid.
This was, these would have been issues from like the late 80s and the early 90s, and I was probably buying these or reading these in like the late 90s.
Okay.
Mid to late 90s. So some of them would have been like a year or two after they've been initially released, and then some of them might have been about 5 years,
Right.
But then, like I said, I was still going to Books A Million. I was like getting I was really big in the Archie Sonic run.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And for some reason, I was really into the Batman Forever comic adaptation that came out. I remember that for some reason.
Do you still have your copy of that?
Oh yeah, somewhere.
Okay, I was gonna say, because I have 2 of those, so if you don't, I'll drop some nostalgia on you.
No, yeah, I definitely have that still.
Yeah.
There were a couple other things that were coming out back then that I kind of vaguely remember, but mostly for some reason it was that Sonic book, the Archie Sonic run.
Yeah, I remember buying that at Walden Books. I would get that book. Classmate, I was in like 2nd grade, brought him to school one day, and I started collecting them too. Yeah, I actually bought a Sonic book. God, I guess this is probably like 3 or 4 years ago now at this point, but it feels like it wasn't that long ago. But I read online. Do you remember the video game Beautiful Joe?
Yeah.
Yeah, so apparently like there was like an article on like Bleeding Cool, one of those dumb comic websites that like has news. But they were like, hey, Beautiful Joe's going to show up in the new issue of Sonic. And I was like, oh, shit.
Why?
I've got to. Well, apparently, I guess because like Capcom and Sega, or I don't know how it happened.
Okay.
But I was like, hey, I've got to check this out because I love Beautiful Joe. And it was like a 1-page thing where he just showed up in the background. So I haven't bought a Sonic comic since.
You felt lied to.
Yeah, dude. But no, I mean, like, it's kind of funny because, like, in small town Kentucky, there was that comic shop, but besides that, it was Walden Books, and that was like, I guess, the mainstream peak of comics was like you can go to the mall and 7-Eleven and get them, and now it's just this specialty thing.
Yeah.
And I think, like, comic shops that I really love, there was a shop in Nashville called Brain Freeze, and
that's a cool name.
They were a shop that ran, like, they never had their own location, but they ran inside of other locations. So like there was a record store and they had like a back room of it, and it was just like this curated collection of like, they had their standard like, heavy hitters, like, you had your Ware, Clouds, but they would just bring in like weird like Riso printed comics, and like, John Pham stuff would be there, Ben Mara stuff. And this is like, 2012, 13. So before, I don't want to say before they were big, but, while they were doing it, they had like Ryan Cecil Smith. So I would just go to Brain Freeze, because it was close to the college town I lived in. And that really was instrumental in me finding indie comics. Like I knew about like, Klaus and the Hernandez brothers and all those dudes, but just being able to walk in there and just pick up like, there's that publisher, what's Zach Soto, that publisher he works for, called, not Secret Voice, what are they called? Study Group.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and like they would have like the Study Group compilation. So it was just really cool, and that was honestly like one of my favorite shops of all time. And you don't really see too many like indie shops. Like most of the time you've got to like, carry Marvel and DC stuff as like 70% of your stock at least, to stay afloat. But, you've got your shops like Quimby's and I guess like Brain Freeze, and I know Desert Island up in New York, that are just, dedicated. And what's the one in Toronto called? Isn't there one that's really big in Toronto?
I don't know the name, but I know you're talking about.
Yeah. So, I mean, props to those shops. Those are like my favorite kind of comic shops to visit, just because like you're going to go in and you're going to find some stuff you're familiar with, but you're going to just pick stuff up and flip through it and take it home based off of that first like initial experience you have flipping through it in the store. And that's not really something that you can replicate, I feel like, in a mainstream comic store. Because you kind of know what you're getting.
I agree. I feel like that was one of the reasons why I really love the shop that Katrina works, is because they will carry stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And granted, it'll be super limited. They'll only have like 5 to 10 copies. But I mean, it's again, the people that are going to that shop, I don't think they fully grasp how spoiled they are in that sense. It's like a mainstream comic shop that also has like these like super small press weirdo books that you wouldn't find at any other, and also not any other location that is like part of that chain either. It's like that one specific location of that chain that has that stuff. So
yeah, and I mean that's like incredible that she's able to like get that stock in there. And we kind of touched base on it last episode, but listeners, as we promised, we do have part 2 coming up after this, so stick around for that.
Yeah, like that was good.
Yeah,
that was good.
We'll be right back.
Holy comic books, it's Batman!
Not just comic books, Billy. Bosco's has it all. T-shirts, baseball cards, models, posters, computer games, role-playing games, anything a law-abiding citizen could want.
Golly, Batman, you sold me.
Just a Gotham City Minute, Billy. There's more. Bosco's has gift certificates. Take it from this Cape Crusader. Don't be a joker. Come to Bosco's.
Now, back to our program.
Going back to the book sales that you had mentioned, like Green Arrow not really performing at all. In your opinion, why do certain books perform and others don't? Is that something that's on the publisher? Is that something that's on the distributor? Is it both? Is it in your opinion?
Well, I think it depends on the book. I think it depends on like a few factors, like, you know, like you can put a really great creative team on a really cool character and still like not market it at all. And it might do terribly, you know? But also, like, I mean, like 9 times out of 10, I think that, you know, bigger publishers are not taking, like, enough risks with creative teams. They're, like, too committed to, like, a house style. They're too committed to continuity. Like, I feel like if you could, you know, if you're, like, working as an editor at, you know, whatever comic company and, let's say, like, you couldn't do Green Arrow, like, you were in charge of, you know, who was going to make Green Arrow. Like, you could find, like, some cool, weird kid that had a great style and, like, you know, hear some pitches for, like, really wacky ideas of shenanigans he could get into. And, like, I think it would be, like, fun, you know, especially if you took the time to, like, stick with that and, like, let it come out for a while and let shops, like, love it. And then, you know, the next step is to have your customers love it because you're so excited about it.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it is that it's like the same stuff. Like there's nothing, they're not taking a lot of risks with creators. And obviously, like, you know, when things are in a slump, that's probably not anyone's first instinct is to like take risks with like creative teams or whatever. But I don't know. I think that's like a part of it is that it's like kind of the same thing. And, you know, people get sick of the same thing after a certain period of time and don't want to spend their $4 a month on it or whatever.
Right. Because I know one complaint that was completely repeated over and over by a certain groups of people was that the reason why sales are tanking with Marvel and DC and other kind of like, you know, whatever Image, just comic publishers in general with superhero books specifically, is because of the, you know, the kind of SJW politics that they allegedly are kind of trying to push. And, right. But I mean, do you think that there's something to that in terms of publishers maybe using, like you said, predatory tactics, but in terms of just like pandering without really any kind of thought behind those directions?
So I think sometimes that's the case. I think so. Okay, for example, like I was talking about a few years ago when Miles Morales Ultimate Spider-Man was coming out. Like that book was great. Yeah. And that character was really fleshed out and interesting and real. Like he felt like a real kid, you know? And like I said, at that same time, G. Willow Wilson was writing Miss Marvel. That was great. She like felt like a real person with like a real identity. I do think because those books did so well, and they did well because they were coming from a genuine place, from like, you know, creators who were interested in making real characters, like who are actual real people and not stereotypes or tokens or whatever. I think that, you know, it's easy for a publisher to see that those books do really well and then kind of like flood the market with that concept, but without any actual like substance to it. So I'm hesitant to say that that's like an actual issue in comics because I think it's a symptom of the actual issue in comics, which is just general pandering and, like I said, not really taking risks or doing anything that's actually like creative and like, you know, heartfelt and actually like driven by like genuine storytelling. But yeah, like I said, I think that's like just a symptom, and you know, it's pretty frustrating when it gets blamed as the cause when I think the cause is a lot bigger. But I don't think, you know, Jane Foster having the Hammer of Thor for 30 issues or whatever was the real problem.
Do you see,
especially because that book was awesome?
Well, and you know, we're talking about like, you know, that's like a good example. Like, so let's say, you know, when Jane Foster's in Thor, your casual audience member that is exposed to these superheroes from the big two are obviously seeing the movies. You know, that's where the bread and butter for these companies are. So do you see like an uptick in sales when, like right now, Captain Marvel's out? Are you seeing a lot of people come in asking for Captain Marvel stuff? Are they going for the floppy, or are they buying like a collected edition of something that's already been done? And in a case like, you know, Thor, even, you know, you mentioned Jane was Thor for a while. Like if somebody comes into a shop and they're looking for Thor from the Avengers and they see Jane, are they usually confused by it? Are they open to that? What do you usually see with that kind of? Well,
so I will say I try, and you know, all of this too is with like the grain of salt that I can only speak to like my specific shop. So like it might be wildly different at other comic shops, but I will say, so at my comic shop, like I try very hard to like, we try to ask people if they need anything and ask to explain things before people can have the chance to even ask us, you know, or be confused by whatever. Right. You can kind of tell too when someone walks in, like right off the bat, if they've ever been in a comic shop at all before. It's kind of written on their face, and you know that like makes my job easier in a way. Like I love, what my favorite part of my entire job is like helping people realize that they can like read and like comics even if they never have before. And so people are not usually like hesitant to read a comic that doesn't look like the movie, because I think what at the end of the day is actually like appealing about the movies, and then, you know, the step beyond that, the comics, is just that like it's this really weird, wacky, like fun, like action adventure sci-fi thing that like we can all just like participate in. And so, you know, if Jane Foster doesn't look like Thor Odinson, then like I don't think that that's necessarily usually what's going to drive people away, because I think if they watch a Thor movie and they're really pumped about it, and then they come in and I can say like, oh well, actually Thor did some shady stuff and how he's not worthy of his hammer, and so Jane Foster's has the power of Thor, like that just makes it more interesting to I think people who don't already have like a chip on their shoulder about, you know, whatever. So, but Captain Marvel specifically, I will say, so, you know, a lot of times I feel like actually I don't get a lot of people who come in and say like, hey, I have never read a comic before, but I just saw this movie and I want to read such and such comic. Okay. It happens every once in a while, but I don't think, I will say I don't think that I have generally noticed after many of the Marvel movies like a specific wave of whatever. Some of the big ones, like right after Infinity War, like I sold a lot of copies of the Trade of Infinity Gauntlet. But a lot of that too was to people who were already reading comics and just weren't familiar with that storyline, or, you know, whatever. But I will say Captain Marvel specifically, so I was working all day yesterday, and there were two separate parents, like separate, that came in at different points during the day, who were going to two separate kids' birthday parties in town that were both Captain Marvel themed, and they both bought like a ton of Captain Marvel comics for like this kid whose birthday, or these kids whose birthdays it were. And so that was pretty fun. I think Captain Marvel, weirdly specifically, I feel like I have had a lot of people, I think especially because that's like a character people don't know a lot about.
There's no like preconceived like notion of that character. Everybody knows who the Avengers are, but she's kind of, you know, new. She's not been like on cartoons or whatever, really. But yeah, so I feel like I have sold a good bit of Captain Marvel stuff, which makes me really happy because she's great and that movie was amazing.
Was it like that with, like, say for example, like Guardians of the Galaxy, that also might not have had, you know, such a kind of pop culture presence initially? It probably was. I honestly, that one was just further, like, longer ago that I may not remember. Like, Captain Marvel was literally, like, yesterday that I was doing that. But yeah, I think it probably is more often the characters that have, like, general, aren't, like, immediately familiar to, you know, the average layperson or whatever. Because, like, who's gonna go and see a trailer for a Spider-Man movie and be like, what's this?
Everybody knows who Spider-Man is.
That character.
So I will say, though, like, so after Into the Spider-Verse came out, like, yes, everybody knows who Spider-Man is, and that's probably why they saw that movie, but then they were like, who's this Miles Morales fellow? And I, like, am selling so many Miles Morales comics right now, so that's pretty cool.
That is really cool.
But yeah, I think it's less, I think there is some like just outright new people coming in, but I think a lot more of it is people who are already interested in comics who are like, I didn't even know about these guys. Okay. So that's pretty fun.
So not so much getting new readers, which is what comic books kind of need.
Yeah, well, sometimes. I think to some extent. And so I think honestly, like my favorite rant to go on is that I think, especially, actually, no, I was going to say especially bigger companies, but I think it's honestly all publishers, when an 8-year-old kid comes into like comics were literally invented for children. And like when an 8-year-old kid comes into my comic shop, it is work to find something to sell them.
Oh, right.
Like,
yeah. Because none of the characters on the big two are really, they're all teen plus. They have ratings on the books. So it's all like teen and teen plus.
Everything is published for, like 40-year-old dudes, which is, fine. Like that's a market, but it's very frustrating that, like the whole concept of like getting new blood into an industry that needs new blood, like is completely being ignored. Like, like when a kid comes in and wants, like an actual child comes in and wants a Batman comic, I literally cannot sell them anything that's an individual issue form. I intentionally keep in stock that Batman animated adventures. There's like graphic novel versions of those. I intentionally keep those in stock for like, the 10-year-old boy that comes in once a month and wants a Batman comic because that's all I can give him.
Yeah. Do you think, do you think it's the price point? Because, back in the day, comic, of course, inflation, but, comics were, really, really cheap. And I mean, I feel like even as a child, I could at least get 2 or 3 books for $5. And when you're a kid, $5 is a lot of money. Now you can really only get one title for $5 because they're all $3.99. Do you think that's why these companies are marketing them towards 40-year-old guys? Because they at least have disposable income where, a child doesn't?
Yeah, well, no, that's probably true. But, I will say also, like, I'm like in a busy part of town. There's not like kids riding their bikes from down the neighborhood like into my store by themselves. Like kids come in with their parents because their parents bring them. Right. And especially like a lot of kids don't like reading books without pictures, and I get so many parents who bring their kids in specifically because they want their kid to get excited about reading, which is great because I think comics are really good for that. And so because of that, I think usually parents are willing to like spend a little bit of money on that. And like a lot of books are like, if you can get an individual issue that's like appropriate for a kid, like if you get one issue for $5, like you still can get something as like a kid, there's just, but there's just like not a lot there for kids, unfortunately.
I mean, I think that just points to the thing that you had brought up initially, is that they're basically just going back to a well that clearly has dried up or clearly doesn't work in their favor, thinking that if they just continue down this path that eventually it'll work in their favor, but that's never been the case and probably never will be. And it's almost like they're focusing on extremely short-term business goals. Oh,
for sure.
Right?
For sure. There's no concept of what comics will look like in 10 years, I don't think.
That's wild.
Yeah, because I think like it's such a small, like it's such a small industry. And I think not just, stores, but publishers, like everybody's kind of hanging on by a thread, like, and all you can do is look at next week, like I do. So our diamond orders, I just submitted my diamond order for May, and that's about as far as like we look ahead, really.
Yeah.
Like 6 weeks out or something.
Yeah, like what the next previews covers. So because it's impossible to know. First of all, retailers are completely beholden to what what publishers want to do. And we don't know until 6 weeks ahead. And then also, like, I think publishers, like, the industry is just in such a weird place that no one's willing to like commit to any sort of like long-term plan of things, at least, and not in a lot of ways, because you don't know how it's going to do, and you don't know how soon you're going to want to cancel it and try something else. So, like, obviously there's exceptions to that. Like, Jason Aaron's been writing Thor for years and years and had this whole long plan about where it was going. Like, he knew what he wanted to do all along, and they've, like, let him execute that, which is awesome. But there's not enough of that in comics, unfortunately, especially for people who don't have the name Jason Aaron, like, it's a benefit, like, awarded to, like, the
handful of guys, basically.
The dudes I can count like on one hand. Like,
Bendis will get a book, and then I guess, like, Batman's been pretty good about that. Like, they had Scott Snyder on it for like 3, 4, 5 years, and now Tom King's on it for like 100 issues, but it's really rare. Usually you get like a 6-issue, 12-issue series that gets canceled and restarted 4 months later with a different team.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, going back to, because we mentioned Diamond quite a bit, since they are really the only horse in town, right? Doing this. It's like distribution is pretty much all handled by one company.
Yeah. And
turns out that leads to problems. So maybe we should touch on that, because I think that plays sort of a really, really important role in terms of the, like we mentioned, kind of short-term business planning of comics as an industry.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest issue with that is just that there is no... I mean, not to be a capitalist, because I generally would not say I am one, but, like, like, the monopoly, like, them being the only option for any comic shop to have kind of lets them be mediocre. Right. Not all the time and not about everything, but, they don't have... I don't have the capability of saying, like, well, like, I might take 6 months off and try these other guys out and see how it goes. Mm-hmm. And so, like, I mean, obviously that in any industry, that would be a hard thing to just be able to have, one person basically calling the shots for everything.
Yeah, I mean, I worked in restaurants for like 6 years, and you had food distributors coming by on a daily basis, like being like, hey, can I talk to you? We have this product. And like comics, there's just one game. Yeah. But yeah, like, it's crazy. There's just like one place. Like, for listeners that don't know how it works, there's a company called Diamond, and if you want any kind of inventory for your shop, you have to order from them. You have no other option.
Yeah, unless, like, some shops will do small orders, like, directly through publishers and stuff like that. But yeah, as far as, like, large scale whatever, like, I can't, like, call DC and be like, hey, will you ship me 50 copies of Batman? Like, that's not how it works at all.
Yeah. But there have been a couple of companies that kind of throw their hat into the game, and obviously not successfully, because it's still a monopoly. So, why do you think that is? Is there sort of an active, I don't want to say conspiracy, because I don't think that's the case, but just by sheer planning and sort of the outmoded state of comics in general? What is it that's causing it for just this one company to be responsible for all of the distribution for all comics, or anything really, in comic shops across the nation?
I think for a lot of parties involved, it's probably just because it's easy. If there's one distributor, then Marvel only has to have comics shipped to one distributor. They don't have to say, we have to print this many for this distributor and this many for this distributor. And I don't know. The Diamond thing is like a much more convoluted aspect of the industry that's kind of hard to pick apart and figure out what exactly is the problem with it and what exactly could be better. Because, I honestly can't. I don't think that it'll probably change, maybe ever, because I don't. It's like, at this point, it's like the postal service. Like, it's just like a thing that exists, and that's how you do that thing. Like, you just have a mailbox and you put your stuff in the mail, and there's a guy who comes and gets it. Like, that's how Diamond is to comic shops. It's just like, that is the thing that brings us our stuff.
But even then, you have FedEx, UPS.
Yes, that's true. But you know what I'm saying, in that it's a big institution.
Yeah, the tried and true infrastructure.
It doesn't even feel like a business. It's just more an infrastructure. Like, it's just how things get done in comics. And so I think it would be a much bigger, like, I think, honestly, and it would be a lot easier to fix, like, all the problems with publishing and stuff than it would be to figure out even what the true heart of the issues with Diamond are, and like how they could be fixed. Because I don't necessarily think the answer would be, just some person with a few bucks in their pocket and a dream to like open another distributor and hope that it does well with like better customer service or whatever. Like, I don't think that that's necessarily the answer either.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen a lot of change in the 5? You said 5. Well, you've been there 5 or 6 years, I think you said. Is that right?
Yeah, 5.5 or so.
5.5. Have you seen like a lot of change, whether it's on the distribution side, whether it's in like the customer base? I mean, I know earlier we were kind of touching on like the business kind of being in a slump right now, but have you seen any kind of like drastic changes that just either didn't exist 5-6 years ago, or did exist and don't now and have gone away?
I will say, okay, so I will say, since we were just talking about Diamond specifically, I will say I have, in the 5.5 years that I've worked in a comic shop, I have a lot fewer damages and shortages and overages every week now on average than I did, 4 or 5 years ago.
I know it was a major problem a couple years back, right? Yeah.
And I mean, there's still some wacky stuff. The last like 3 weeks, I've gotten like just one binder clip in each of my boxes, like for no discernible reason. But like it's fairly harmless stuff, It's
it's a little bizarre, but okay.
Yeah. But I will say, I'm getting the wrong book a lot less often. So I think honestly, Diamond's biggest problems functionality wise are just that they're so big and do so much that it's like very hard to have like sustainable error proof systems in place. Like, I mean, I get boxes from Diamond twice a week, and I'm one small comic shop. Like every Tuesday I get about somewhere between 5 and 8 boxes, and then I get a couple more later on in the week. Like, that's a lot, and I'm one shop, and they're shipping to literally every shop. Like that's a lot to handle. So as far as the amount that they handle, I think they probably do maybe almost as good as anybody could, because it does seem like it would be a really, somewhat impossible task to do. But so that has for sure changed. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say the other thing that I would say has changed is that I have seen... So I have like a gang of like 7-year-old girls that come to my comic shop now. And it's
a gang.
Well, I like joke that they're a gang. They don't even know each other. They come in at separate times, like with their parents.
Okay.
But we're like we're kind of like collecting these little girls who are like so excited about comics, and it's not like a weird thing for them to be into. And that's so great. I will say that has changed. I feel like I have a lot more. As much as it is still like a problem and I have to work really hard to find things to sell them sometimes. I will say I think more kids are like interested in what comics are, and
that's awesome.
And part of that might be like movies, like those kids 7 or 8 or whatever are probably seeing Marvel movies, and if they're excited about reading something, their parents are like, yeah, let's check it out. So like that is probably like movies are probably helpful for that age demographic more than anything.
You should show them Street Angel. The Jim Rugg book. Image puts it out. I
sell Street Angel to almost everybody. I love that book so much. It's great.
Like I said earlier, I mean, that shop is really, those kids are being spoiled. I don't think maybe 20, 30 years they'll be able to look back and kind of really realize in retrospect. But I mean, having that shop run by you and through the regional manager, Ed and Jake and Aaron, it's like, no one would really have that experience. Like you said, going to Tampa, they would have never gotten that there.
I actually have
crazy.
A story that is a good example of exactly the level of like preciousness that comes from all of this. Is there's this one little girl especially that comes into my shop, and because the book that Aaron just recently did was Bully Wars, an all ages book with Scotty Young.
Okay, I saw that.
So it was coming out, and I obviously had a ton of copies on my shelf because a lot of people, like Aaron used to work there, so a lot of people were buying it, especially because they knew him personally, and so I was selling a lot of that book at my store specifically. And this little girl who had been coming in, like I knew her, she came in one time and just like saw it on the shelf without me saying anything and picked it up, and she was like, whoa, this book is so cool. She was like so excited about it. And then I was like, oh, surprise, my husband's one who draws that book. And she was like blown away, like so excited. And then a few weeks ago, Aaron, I think it was I forget if it was a page or something like that, something he had like messed up a little bit, and so he re-inked it, but like the first version like was fine and still really cool. And he
that's Aaron.
Yeah.
That's Aaron. Yeah.
But he like knew this little girl was like a huge fan of his, and so he just like gave me the page to give to her, and she cried. Like she literally cried when I gave it to her. And so like stuff like that is really cool. Like that when I'm having a hard day at work, I'm like, okay, there are reasons I am here, and they're worth it.
And it's wild that, again, like this shop in Lakeland, Polk County, Florida, I don't even think kids in like, New York, like near in like Union Station get experiences like that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't work at any of those stores. Maybe everybody's giving away pages at comic shops to kids.
I can pretty much say with like a pretty high level of certainty, no, they are not. Yeah, or that level of service and just kind of like knowledge base. I don't know, like that. Well, I guess the main point that we're getting at here is just like those kids are really lucky to have you guys at that shop and have that shop in general.
Well, yeah, thanks. I will say both Jake and I really like. I mean. It's like I like talking to the grown dudes who come in about whatever. Like I honestly have like one of the greatest customer bases probably on planet Earth. Like they're all very nice and super cool, and we can chat about all kinds of stuff. But there is like a whole other level of satisfaction to like see a kid who is still so capable of being like visibly excited about something, to like show them something for the first time that could be something that they love forever. Like that is I'm like very lucky to have that job. Yeah.
And I think that speaks to kind of the business model of the, main like comic industry at that scale, is that really it is coming from the bottom up, right? Like these publishers and these distributors, they're the ones, right, with all the money and the marketing team and whatnot. But really what is directing sales and sort of the overall attitude towards the medium is from people like you, right?
Yeah. And, I think some publishers are starting to realize that. So I don't know. Did either of you guys like read anything about Comics Pro that just happened recently? Like any of the kinds of discussions that were happening there?
I read like a very broad article that had like a few things bullet pointed, but I didn't really like do any kind of in-depth reading about it. But I did hear that there was like a really big focus on like, the retail side of things, like, and how DC was taking those Walmart exclusive books and bringing them over to other regular shops and stuff.
Yeah, so, Comics Pro is this big, publishers and retailer conference, basically, to talk about the state of the industry and how things are going and what anybody, like, whichever party can do to make it more functional. And they had this year, like, so actually the owner of my comic shop company, who has a lot to say about the industry, and also, like, Brian Hibbs and Joe Field, who both have run big shops for like a very long time and are also very vocal about the industry. They had all of them like give speeches at Comics Pro about basically asking them what's wrong with comics right now and like what can be done about it. And like, they had a lot of like really interesting, good, I think super valuable things to say. And the fact that like the industry asked them to say it, I think is really indicative of hopefully a good direction. That publishers are now, I think for a long time, the mindset was kind of like, well, we're doing these things and we know they should work. So like it's on you guys, the retailers, to make sure that it works.
Yeah, the super arrogant, too big to fail kind of attitude. Right.
But I think now they're kind of realizing that like they won't sell anything unless we like it and we want to sell it, Right. And so like for them to sit back and say like, okay, well, like what do you want to sell and how do you want to sell it is I think a really good thing. And I think hopefully if that kind of like attitude and relationship continue to it continues to be a conversation, then I think the industry has nowhere to go but up if that is how things go forward. A step forward. Yeah
No, I mean that's super positive. It's I am definitely the skeptical one of the two here on Gutter Boys, but I mean if that trajectory continues and the industry and these publishers and distributors and whatnot are really willing to take that criticism and really do something positive with it, then they might be able to learn something and actually kind of steer the ship back towards not self-destruction.
And it's like sometimes I wonder about what the possible, absolute, even unrealistic, worst case scenario could be for the entire comics industry in the future.
Yeah.
And so let's say all these Comicsgate rumors about Marvel shutting down the comics industry. It's let's pretend that might be true for a second, which it's not.
Yeah.
But
right. Yeah. It has no merit at all. But yeah. Sure.
Right. So let's say whatever, comics, the numbers keep plummeting. Marvel and DC go bankrupt. They should stop publishing comics. Let's say Image is hanging out by a thread. It's a few indie publishers who are essentially self-published stuff. Probably not enough to support retail establishments anymore. Even at that point, when I think about this dystopian future for the entire world that I have right now, it still is there's always going to be people who are really excited about comics and who are going to make comics.
Yeah.
So let's say
Batman.
let's say no one owns the rights to Batman someday. Some kid is going to learn about Batman and draw the dopest Batman comic, even if things really somehow go completely toe up, it's going to be fine. So I don't know. And it's kind of scary to even think about that, even though, that's incredibly unrealistic that would be the case anyway. But, comics are so much about just, people being excited about this, really specific kind of bizarre art form. And, it's gonna exist no matter what. So, sometimes it feels like Marvel and DC kind of own that art form, but they most definitely don't. And,
right, they don't.
Yeah, people are gonna do what they want to do forever.
No, definitely. Going back to that hypothetical, sort of where do you see the sort of business as a whole in the next 10 years if they do
you see it moving digitally entirely, or do you think there's always going to be brick and mortar? Do you see a digital threat there?
I think
we kind of talked about that on an episode before, digital versus physical comics.
Well, I think so. Okay, so Aaron and I, we both really like comics. We're also record collectors. I think there's something about things like that. There's something really integral to comics about the tactileness of it.
Right.
Yeah. Having an item, an object.
Yeah.
Something to collect.
And also just not to feel incredibly cheesy, but the way it smells, the way the texture of the paper and stuff like that, all of that I feel is a really big part of reading comics. And customers, I have a handful of people who are read some digital comics, but they still come in my shop and are oh, but this one I want to own a copy of. I think digital comics have a place in the world because people want to read things that maybe they don't care about owning, or whatever, or maybe they want to own something and never actually touch it. Maybe they only want to collect it, and so they can read a digital copy. But I don't think that the actual industry itself, and I mean I could be completely wrong, who knows, but I don't think that the actual industry itself is actually going to be really threatened by digital stuff in any way.
I 100% agree with that. Right.
Yeah.
And I don't even see it as a threat, right? I mean, I think those can work in tandem with one another.
Yeah, exactly. And I mentioned records, records come with that little digital download thing. And sometimes I want to listen to the record, and sometimes I play it on my phone in the car.
Absolutely.
It depends. There's room for both.
Yeah, I don't think it should be an if. I don't think it's a zero-sum game, right? You can have both. And if anything, we should be pushing actively both, because I think that'll bring in new readership and get a whole new sort of segment of the population that probably otherwise wouldn't be reading.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
And, with comics, I think out of all the medium that we consume still, I would say it's comics and it's books, and now it's also records, music albums and stuff like that. Those are really the only things that we're still consuming that you still have shops dedicated specifically to those things, and obviously some of those have taken a hit over the last 20 or 30 years. I mean, look at the state of FYE and what is it? What was
Tower
the book
Records
shop?
Went out a few. Barnes and Noble.
No. The ones that started closed. Borders, yes, and those going belly up, right? But the fact that we still have stores dedicated to those mediums, I think, is really kind of interesting and proof that people do still want those tactile things, those objects, even though now, I mean, books are sold quite a bit now in digital format, but they're still selling tons in physical format. So
yeah, but there's like kind of an irreplaceable experience that comes from like all these things you're talking about. So like Borders closed, but like when was the last time like someone got hired at Borders that like felt really passionately about like a writer or anything and was like talking to people about it? All of those things are still sold and like thriving in places where people want to like have conversations about that medium, where you can like, if you bring Superman, like a Superman comic up to my like counter, like I'm gonna be like, hey, have you read All-Star Superman? Because it is dope and you should read it. Like, and people want to talk about stuff like that, and that's why people also like continue to buy those things, because it's not just like the physical object that is like fun and an experience in and of itself, but it's also like the cultural experience of like discussing a physical object that like like is not like purchased in a vacuum, like while you're sitting on your toilet or whatever. Like you're like actually going to a place and seeing a human who cares about the same thing that you do. Like that's like an important part of being human.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting point, because like, with things like Borders and sort of like Books A Millions and these kind of like larger brick and mortar shops that are specific to that medium that are kind of in that downturn, you still see local shops. And I think that's why we don't really see too many like major scale chains for comic shops. Like the smallest it get, or the largest that it really gets is in your case, right? You have one that's specific to the state. Yeah, so we're a chain of 8 stores, but I will say also like, so the owner, like he started this company like 36 years ago, and he still like comes to work every single day. And like he was a kid when he started this comic shop, and he started it just because he loved comics. And like he still like works his ass off, like making sure he can like scrap together like a company that functions, and also works like incredibly hard to hire people that all like care about comics as much as he did, like whether they like the same comics he did or not, or whether we like anything that he likes or not, like he still like works really hard to put people in his stores that are like excited to be there and excited to talk to people about what they're excited about. And I think like that is the only way like that a company even of our size like can function, is that the emphasis isn't necessarily on like how quickly you can ring a person up or whatever. It's like, it's honestly more like how slowly can you ring a person up and like talk to them about stuff, Can you remember their kids' names? Like that kind of stuff is a lot more important. Absolutely, because you can get that experience now on Amazon. If you really wanted to get something without any sort of personal connection, without any sort of conversation or exchange of ideas and tastes, you just go on a website, click a button, and you'll have it within a couple of days. Yeah. And I think that points to the need for any real industry to focus on sort of smaller scale kind of, I guess grassroots, but you know what I mean? Just kind of like not large faceless entities. Right. And rather just like something that comes from a genuine place, like a small chain. Yeah. Where just people are actually like interested and excited by what they're selling. Exactly. And it doesn't necessarily even feel like selling. Like I don't when I go to work, I'm not like, I'm gonna hustle this book and sell so much of it. Like I honestly just sell stuff that I'm like really excited about and feel like I'm having like a conversation with friends about, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you haven't read this, you should read it. Like that's just how people excited about the medium. Yeah, and that's really what's keeping the industry afloat still, right? Like it's definitely not for sure. It's not Disney that's saving comics. It's the readership and the people like you in the shops talking to people and making that connection with the readers. Yeah, hopefully. Well, I definitely try really hard too. So. No, you are. I mean, I wouldn't say that just to say it. I think it's definitely, people. There needs to be more people like you, and I think that they do exist. Obviously, it's just. It's really hard for us to kind of be able to see that in any way, since it is, on that ground floor from city to city, town to town. Yeah. And, I think also like comic shops in general are kind of changing as like the demographic is changing. Like, I think, like there's the idea of like the old comic shop and like the Simpsons, like comic book guy, like that kind of thing is kind of like extinct at this point. Like, like it exists here and there. And like, if that is like what the shop you go to is like, and that's what you enjoy, like that's great. Like at the end of the day, that's what matters if you're happy being in a place. But I think, comic shops are currently, a lot more like
young people that are like really excited about like weird stuff happening in comics, and they'll like pick their 10 books they're super pumped about and like really want to talk to people about those books. And it's not so much it's a lot less like gatekeepery, which I think is a really good thing.
Absolutely. And I think that, me and Cam, specifically me, are very critical of like the quickness to jump to movie and TV adaptations over the comic medium, right? But I think one of the major things that I can say that is a positive because of from movie and TV adaptations is that it has made these things that were initially completely controlled by gatekeeping to this much broader audience that's far more inclusive, or at least has the opportunity to be inclusive.
Yeah, totally. No, I think that is a huge part of it. Is that,
and I think that's why you see Comicsgate happening. It's because that's gone now.
Right. Yeah. No, it's for sure like a last gasp on like trying to, keep it like some sort of like exclusive club. But like if you actually love something, like wouldn't you want everyone on Earth to also love it? Like,
well, no, because then if you remove that, then now they have no excuse to be an unfuckable fucking horrible monster. Right. They don't have another excuse to point to and say, this is why I can't get laid.
Yeah. I will say, like there are plenty of days where I really hate being a woman in a comic shop, but more often than not, I'm like really happy to be able to, like, sometimes I feel like sometimes just being the person behind the counter kind of like sets a tone in my store when a new person walks in there.
Absolutely.
And if for no other reason, I'm like kind of glad that I can do that sometimes.
Right. Especially if it's like kids, right? Because that kind of sets the tone.
Oh, or even like crabby old dudes, like I'll like look you in the face and dare you to ask me what issue number like was somebody's first appearance. Like, I have no time or energy for that like gatekeepery stuff, which people try and pull sometimes. But
you are part of sort of this kind of this kind of network of retail workers in the comic business that are all women, right? There's like a thing that exists.
Yeah. So I think you're talking about the Valkyries.
Yeah.
They have actually officially disbanded now, unfortunately.
Oh, okay. Well, that shows how up to date I am.
But it just kind of got like too big for moderation capabilities and everything,
I see. Okay.
But it was, so I joined the Valkyries like not long after I started working at the shop, like part-time, 5.5 years ago. And it was maybe like a couple hundred people. And then when I think it disbanded, it was like a little over 800 people. Like it,
okay.
really grew, and there were a lot of them. And but the Valkyries, honestly, I think have like had a really, as much as like people might not know they exist, I think the Valkyries had like a really like tangible impact on the comics industry. We would get like advanced PDFs of books from creators all the time, and like they'd ask like basically our like feminist opinion of it and stuff like that, like which is really cool, like that it could be like for people to see, it's one thing to say like, yeah, girls read comics, but like when it's a group of 600 of them like who know more about comics than you do, like it's very hard to like ignore that they can have like an effect on the industry. And so it was, that was a really important part of me like working in a comic shop, honestly, was being able to see that there were, because sometimes it can be very isolating to be like a woman in a comic shop. But to have like, literal evidence of like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of other women who are like having the exact same experience as I am and having the exact same good experiences that I am too. Like that was really nice.
That's awesome. Yeah. MJ, that I think, from the Valkyries.
Yeah, I've never even like met her, but I know her from the Valkyries. Yeah,
that's so fun. Well, you will, next weekend.
Oh yeah, cool. I'm excited.
She'll be there. But she shares like horror stories. Some better than others, obviously, or some just kind of like benign. The scale shifts from benign to just like what the hell.
Yeah.
Like we talked about the positive stories. So are there anything like, because you work in retail, anybody that's worked in retail has some maybe not so great experiences working in retail. I think that's just across the board, regardless of what industry it is. Just working in retail can be pretty rough. I think that's honest to say that, but.
So I mean, like horror stories even sounds like really extreme for probably any bad experiences I've had. I've only had to kick somebody out of the store one time. Have I stood near our panic button a lot? Yes. But that's,
God.
nothing like came of it. But, sometimes you're like, maybe I should be near this just in case.
I think that would fall under horror.
I guess so. Sometimes people just get crazy eyes and you're like, this guy might be completely normal, but he also might like completely lose his mind and I really can't tell yet.
Sure. That's fair.
Generally, he did not do anything.
Okay.
But,
Yeah.
The girl's got to have a panic button, but...
No, that's fair. That's fair.
Yeah, so I did have to kick a guy out once because he was trying to sell me like a $300 magic card that I already had one of, and like, how frequently are you going to sell a $300 magic card? So I didn't want it. And he was like being really pushy about it, and he was like, this is a great card, and I was like, dude, I said no, like, get out of here. And then, so my store used to be downtown. There's a lot more like homeless folks down there. And this guy came in while this dude was like basically harassing me into buying this magic card. And he just asked if he could use the store phone. He was very polite. And I was just like, and I was polite in response. I was like, no, man, sorry. Like, I can't do that. We just had the one phone line. Our general rule is not to let anybody use it. But yeah. And he, like, very politely, like, turned around and started to leave, like, was not causing any sort of scene. And this, like, magic card dude was like, that's right, dude, you better walk away.
Oh, God.
Was, like, trying to, like, defend me in some, like, incredibly bizarre, like, sexist way. And I was like, get out of here, dude. I, like, went off on him. And then he was, like... pissed that I was mad at him. He was like, I was trying to like stick up for you. I was like, are you kidding me? Like, that guy did literally nothing but like ask me a question. So that guy was kind of the worst.
Defending your honor.
Yeah. He's the only person I've kicked out of my store, which was very satisfying to do.
Yeah, for sure.
And Sam, I mean, I get a lot of the like. No, it's okay. Sorry, I was just gonna say I get a lot of the like people asking me a question and then halfway through me answering, I realized that it was like a quiz, like they already knew the answer. Like that happens a lot, but that's about it. That's the extent of the terribleness.
The rhetorical pop quiz, right?
Yeah. Let's make sure you deserve to be in this store, little lady.
We need to verify whether or not you can work at this kind of minimum wage job.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
No, I was going to say, Cam, you have a couple of stories with your experience working at a shop.
Yeah, and, I worked at a shop in Bowling Green, Kentucky, though, which is like a college town. So, and actually the store now is kind of downhill. But because the guy that was ordering the comics for the longest time, it was a guy named Jason. He was doing it for like 10 years. It was really good about ordering. And now I don't know who they have ordering, but it's awful. But the worst thing that I ever had to do was we actually like bought and sold a lot of, I mean, any comic shop does a lot of like, collections from people. But in Kentucky, you've got a lot of people that are, I mean, for a lack of a better word, you'd have like crackheads come in, there's a lot of meth that goes around Kentucky, and they would go to like the flea market and buy like these dusty, like Valiant #1 issues and think they were worth like a lot of money.
Yeah,
and they bring them in and you're like, dude, I can give you $5 for these 40 comics, and they just have like meltdowns being like, they're worth way more than this. And that was really the only horror stories, is like having to tell somebody that their books really weren't worth anything. And in the 90s, Marvel was printing 1 million copies of a book, so even though you have 19 #1 copies of Spider-Man by Todd McFarlane, you're not going to get much for them, and we're only going to buy 2 of them at most.
Yeah, and also the fact that you have 19 is like the perfect example of why it's worth nothing.
Yeah, it's like
right, might be pointing to the main problem.
I mean, I'm glad that 10 years ago you thought this was going to be your retirement plan, but me having to tell you, that that's not the case. But most of the time it's just people that like, I found these in a garage, and they just think that because they're from the 70s or the 80s that they're worth something. So just having to get into arguments with customers and them thinking, I'll sell them online. It's like, please have at it. You're going to get less than what I would give you.
My favorite thing in the world is when people are like, well, I looked it up on eBay and it said it's worth $2,000. And I'm like, no, some idiot on eBay is asking for $2,000. He's not going to get it.
Yeah. Right. That's pretty much in any collecting sphere, is like, I saw it listed. And he's like, did you look at the sold listings?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Also, like, oh my gosh, condition. People do not understand the concept of condition. And that drives me crazy. You have to give you like a rundown of the grading scale every time people bring comics in. Because I'm like, here's the thing. If you want to look them up on eBay, that's fine. But like something that's a 2 is a lot different than something that's a 9. Like could be like literally a difference of like $1,000. Like,
well, and then also you've got the point where they're like, well, I looked it up on eBay and it's worth $100. And it's like, well, if it's worth $100, I have to sell it for $100. So I can't give you $100 for it. Because
people have a really hard time understanding that I'm not going to give them what I'm going to sell it for.
You're not going to give them full retail, right? Yeah. That's not how a business works. Yeah. Yeah, that's I see that a lot because I collect toys, and I mean that's something that you see a lot of is people being really confused when you bring in a figure that's worth like I don't know, like $40, and they can only get like 20 for it at a store.
Right,
that's high. I feel like even.
Yeah, I feel like you get like, I mean, 25% of its value would be like a good thing from a store.
Yeah. Well, but anyway, Cam, do you have any kind of closing statements about this?
No, I have nothing. But thanks for doing the show, and it was fun. I was glad because this was a really positive episode, and reassuring about the comic industry. And
good. I hope I wasn't like too cheesy. Sometimes I get like really sappy about comics.
We need that to balance me.
Yeah, like I mean, I'm the same way. I love going to the comic store, and I love comics still. I'll buy dumb shit like I'll buy Shazam #1 just to see what it is, and if I like it, I'll continue. But I'm not gonna continue a lot of that stuff. But so I totally love it still.
The only time that I ever get super kind of like that is when we start talking about the connections that we make with either the readers or with other comic creators and makers, and like that's really the only thing that makes this whole thing kind of worthwhile besides the creating aspect, right?
Oh, totally.
Because we're definitely not in it for the money. I think that's something we've established pretty well.
I don't think anyone is, honestly, like, publishers included. Like I don't think anyone
it's a labor of love.
Well, anyway, so again, Katrina, thank you so much for coming on the show, and it was really,
thanks so much,
really
guys.
awesome.
This was really fun.
Yeah, for sure. And you know what? Hopefully we'll have you back on just to kind of shoot the shit, and maybe have Dylan on too.
Okay, cool.
And I think that would be a nice time.
Yeah, totally.
So I think that about does it. If you want to plug anything, if it's your shop or if it's something that you're interested in or something you think our listeners should check out, please do share.
No, screw it. I'm not going to say anything else. Sorry.
Okay, that's fair. All right, well, I'm pretty sure that's it. That's the end. We want to thank Katrina again for her time, and it was a real pleasure to talk to her and get her insight and very knowledgeable input about her experiences working in retail.
Yeah, and we will be back soon with another episode. Stay gutter as always. You can catch us coming up soon. It's mid-April, so in about a month. We're about a month out from Chicago Zine Fest. You can catch the Gutter Gang. Me, JB, Drug Dogs, Dylan, Blake Sims, and Patrick Ian Rooks. I don't even know what table we're at, but we'll be there for all your indie comic needs.
If you want, you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram. I'm Mort Crimp Jr. on both of those, and Cam is Cam Del Rosario.
And as always, thank you to Buster Moody for the music.
Yes, thank you, Buster. Thank you. Yeah, man. I don't know. That's all I got to say about that, I guess.
Gutter Gang for life.
Gutter Gang.